If that works. Oh, you can hear me. I can't hear anyone. Interesting. Okay. I got verification. People can hear me. I'm just going to continue on right now. My name is Kevin Muldoon. And the topic today is how to name tokens in a design system, which if you're familiar with design systems, use them, maybe built a few, this is right up your alley. So I'm a lead design technologist for the Unified Design System at Dow Jones. And we publish the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, Market Watch, Mansion Global, many others. It's a big house for financial and news information. And I'm a design technologist, so we're a blend of creative and development skills. So we understand those needs of designers and engineers, which is totally essential to the success of any design system. See both sides, create a system that works for everyone. So I write on medium.com mainly about design systems. And I've been doing that for 4 years. I've been really enjoying it. I really recommend absolutely taking advantage of that platform. It's good fun, and it's really going to make whatever you're interested in even more interesting, and your depth of knowledge just by the process of writing and having an audience. Totally in. You should give it a whirl. So other things I've done is I've created the genome color tool, which creates palettes for WCAG contrast from brand colors, and I've helped build and architect design systems at several companies. And last year at Dow Jones, I proposed and implemented the tokens first strategy, which increased the scope of our design system, which was built for React and web, to support anything, in particular native iOS and native Android developers, and supporting for white label as well as dark mode. So that was a very exciting project. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart. This is pretty much what I write about, is how to name things in a design system. And I've made my fair share of mistakes. So I'm hoping you don't have to do those mistakes yourself. We'll find out. It's a process. But I did discover that naming tokens was essential to scale for white label and dark mode functionality. Now, I've got like 5 different sections here. I've got the ideal world. I've got why naming tokens is hard, why naming tokens is important, the CTI plus taxonomy of token names, and a conclusion. But for those who may not actually be familiar with design systems, a very, very quick overview. A design system is simply a collection of principles, guidelines, and reusable coded components to create a consistent and cohesive user experience. One of my favorite design systems, and we'll be talking about them quite a bit, is Salesforce Lightning Design System. And they have their principles, one of those keystones of having a design system, but their principles are clarity, efficiency, consistency, and beauty. I love it. It's perfect. And every bit of that actually guides their design system decisions, what to include, what is perhaps not includable, what are we really trying to focus on. So, but that's the design system. But behind the design system is the design tokens. And a design token is a meaningful name for a value. That includes the colors, typography, shadows, spacing. And because you have that meaningful name and the actual real value, it makes the communication between designers and developers effortless. So it's very valuable. So anyway, the ideal world. Well, all design tokens would be named the same. And if that were true, then we could combine and compose multiple design systems into a system that best serves the needs of our particular organization. That would be great, except that's not true. A token defined by Salesforce, one of the big design systems, Lightning Salesforce, doesn't match the token naming used by Adobe or Microsoft or IBM or Material or Ant or anything, and vice versa. And that's even if that token actually is really saying the exact same thing, different names. So design systems right now are very young science, less than a decade old. And though that there were older design systems, such as NASA made one in 1976, IBM design language started in the 1970s. But our design systems for the digital world is pretty much marked by material design and Salesforce, and they nearly came out at the same time. So in that ideal world, or the lack of it, we actually are sort of in a sort of a quandary. But if we wanted to make it in an ideal world, we could do that, but we need to understand some principles of user experience, linguistics, computer science, gamification even, or rather game design, which can actually, these sciences can inform us to create token names that can scale. And I think that's where we want to be eventually. So with that all set, I would love to be able to say, okay, does anybody have any questions? But I don't think anybody can say anything. So I just have to continue on. If someone can, let me know. There are only two hard things in computer science: cache invalidation and naming things. And that was Phil Carlton, and he worked at Netscape and Xerox PARC, great research facility. And that's a common saying among programmers. It's, naming things is hard. And it's absolutely true. It could be a variable, it could be a class, it could be a function, but programmers, if you're doing programming, you're just renaming things until it looks right the next morning. And it's really important because you want to be able to share that with your entire team and they don't go, what does this mean? So naming things is hard, really, because, and that's really what we want to talk about. Why is it hard? Language is hard. And if you think about token names as highly compressed sentences, which they are, like a variable name, it's a language. It's a complete sentence, so therefore it is a language. But we're often not treating it like a language, so that's pretty important. So for instance, in the Salesforce Lightning design system, which I'm just going to use them as an example, they have a token called Palette Gray 1. And that translates to the sentence, I am the lightest color of gray available in the system. That's the limit. But I only know that because I actually looked at the entire, all the grays, all the numbers for the grays. And I could say, oh, well, that must be what it means. So 0 being the lowest number, and then let's say 9 is the highest number. But that's one token. There's another token, which I'll just randomly share, as a brand text link active. And that one says, because it's actually documented, I'm the brand defined color of a text link when a user clicks on it. And it seems simple, but the complexity lies in understanding the shared agreement on what those words mean. And so the only way to explain that is to not talk about design tokens right now. Let's consider maybe a nice, refreshing, ice-cold, syrupy, carbonated beverage. Okay, and I can actually share some visuals here. So let's say you really want one of those things, and you go to the drive-thru, and you say, "Hey, I'd like a pop. I'd like a soda. I'd like a soda pop. I'd like a soft drink." Well, the server would understand that that's a generic term for all sorts of different brands or types of carbonated beverages. And the response would be, hey, what kind of soda or pop do you want? And then you would say, well, I want a Sprite, I want a root beer, I want a Pepsi, and you get the drink that you want. Pretty cool. But maybe you prefer to be more efficient in your communication, and you'd say, well, I want a Coke. You don't even say pop or soda or soft drink. You just say, may I have a Coke, please? But if you're in the state of Texas, which is where I was raised, if you said that, I want a Coke, you might be surprised to hear your server ask, what kind of Coke do you want? What? Well, that's actually quite normal in Texas. And if I really wanted a Coca-Cola, I would say just a Coke. Uh, but now that I live in Connecticut, I have to really recalibrate my brain because I would normally say I want a Coke, and I would expect someone to say what kind of Coke, but that doesn't happen here in Connecticut. They just simply give you the Coke. But that's not the experience in Texas. So the idea is that language is actually quite bound into culture and region. Um, we have to agree on what is a generic term versus a specific term to actually get the user experience that we're actually looking for, the result. For instance, sometimes I say I want a Coke, but in fact, I really wanted a Dr. Pepper. So let me share screen just very, very quickly. So hopefully if you see all of that, over here in the South, that's exactly where Cokes are the generic term. Over here in the Northeast and even the West Coast, you will see more of a soda. And up here on the top, that's that's a pop. I can't even say that word without laughing, but that is what that is. So getting back over here, and but it gets even more complicated for us with design systems, is because the cultural and regional differences between soda, pop, and Coke. Uh, we can kind of account for that, but there's also another culture, and that's the company cultures. So you've talked about IBM, or you've talked about Adobe, or you're talking about anyone else. They have their own cultures. They're very proud of their company cultures. Um, and that kind of brings us to an idea of something called Conway's Law. Any organization that designs a system will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. And I would say by extension, that culture, that language. And design tokens, because we're building them for companies and design systems are being built for companies, every single design system you see out there is very, very tightly bound to the culture of that one company. So it's no wonder why all of our design tokens are named so wildly differently. It's an expression of culture of all those different companies. So why is it important? Well, there's an architect named Thomas Larson who I got the pleasure to meet, and he said, well, you can call a chair a horse, but don't get disappointed if anyone you don't know doesn't understand you. And that's exactly what the world that we're in right now, because we have different cultures, all making their own very unique expressions in their own language, in their own way. So, but the naming of things is the creation of a common shared understanding. And we'd like that to be global. We wouldn't want that to be localized to a region or a particular company. If we could create a global understanding, we could actually communicate and share and even grow. So for instance, and I'll share this right now. And do we even have like a chat? I didn't even see a chat, but I'll share screen. And it's an interesting question because this really kind of brings it all home. The window right there. So why don't we take a survey? Design token UX survey, 1 of 3. So there's a token that is in your design system, let's say, called Palette Gray 1. Which of these hex codes does the name best represent? And a follow-up question, which of those hex codes are definitely not palette gray 1? So, and I'd love some feedback, but I'm just going to have to guess. I would suspect that because you saw the name of gray, you would almost definitely not choose that one. Because that's not gray, is it? It's white. White is not gray. And then I'll continue on a little bit further because actually, in fact, in the Salesforce design system, palette gray 1 is in fact white. So, short, long, they just called a chair a horse. That's confusing. That's a problem. But it's not a problem if you're in Salesforce and you're acclimatized to that culture. Unfortunately, there are more people who will be coming in and new hires that then they have to be acclimatized to exactly what I just pointed out. So why don't we improve that a little bit? Why don't we say, well, maybe the 1 was sort of a confusing. What if we said palette gray 0? Well, that should have improved things. Well, did it? Because while it's 0, and we know that 0 is none, we still have this concept of a gray, which is a noun, which is something. So we have palette something none. so we still have a quite a bit of cognitive dissonance there. But what if we decided to remove the gray, remove the noun, and replace that with an adjective? Palette neutral 0. And in this case, if this survey were to go out and we have a 5,000 respondents, I would guarantee that we would have 99%, if not more, that they've accurately chosen that palette neutral 0 is the white that you would expect, which means that it is a great improvement over palette gray 1. Okay. So we have this idea of token names, and we just did an exercise. It's quite an important exercise of how to make a name better or more universal. Mainly because we already know that all sorts of different design systems by culture have gone all over the map. Some make more sense than others, but there should be a universal sense of this. And if I were to come over here, we've actually figured this out for language. This is a linguistic parsing diagram. So if I said the sentence, "The boy with red shorts kicked the ball and scored a goal," I could very scientifically go ahead and actually create a diagram which describes everything. And though it's in English, I could do this in any language. And I think that's where we want to be. We want to have a design token system that could be parsed in exactly this way. And I think we have that. So here would be a design token schema parsing diagram. So for instance, we were talking about palette neutral. That was our new, improved naming convention for palette gray 1. And there is a structure to it. And you can see that I've defined that as a schema. So it's definitely a color. We got that out of the way. Strange, we don't actually represent that in the name itself. So that'll be the subclass, which would be a category. So for instance, in this taxonomy, we see a domain, a category, a type, an item, a variant, a sub-item, a state, a context. Guess what? That's a lot of stuff. And it's going to be really difficult to actually describe everything. But I can probably get you a little bit of a hint there. But a lot of this is really about best practice. How do you name a design token? And one most curious thing is this idea of a domain. So it is very good practice. It is essential practice to actually put yourself a prefix that says, this is my design system. In this case, this is GNM. This stands for genome. For Dow Jones, we would actually prefix this with DJDS to say this is an approved token. This means that this token will work for any of our brands. The value could change radically. That's fine, but we know it's us. And we know it's different than any other design system that may or may not have actually had full success over the years. So very, very important to do that. So right now, the category is palette. The variant is a neutral. Why neutral? Because we have primaries and secondaries and infos. And then we have a state. And the state is 000 to indicate none. So that is one palette color. And the only other palette color, and I'm not going to go into all the other palette colors because it can't possibly, but a palette color is different than a contextual color, or some people call it a semantic color. And right now we've got a class, it's definitely a color. And from a Lightning Salesforce, they kind of actually have a name called brand. I was like, well, the only way I could actually work that in is to actually say that they've assumed that brand is a subclass of color. Okay, fair. All right, we'll work with it. What's the mode? Well, because it's a contextual color or semantic color, it could be a light mode or a dark mode. So that's the reason why mode is there. But now we get into the taxonomy, which actually drives exactly how that represents when we do that. Once again, we have the domain, any prefix of your choice, whatever you agree on. The category is brand, much like we had palette as a brand. But the item right now is text. We're literally pointing to something, a noun, a thing. And that's the reason why we use an item. And then we have a sub-item of link. So it's an item, it's text. And then the sub-item is a link. So it's a text link. And the state is active, unlike a 000, which describes it describes sizes. It describes pseudo states. It describes small, medium, larges. It's sort of an all-in-one. And it's funny because every time you get into naming, let's say, typography versus a palette color versus a contextual color, as I'm calling this right now, that's the names that you put on the states actually morph. So that's another expression of language. In context, it morphs, and that's okay. That's totally okay. In fact, that's actually quite preferable. But if I come over here and then scroll on down, the thing is, I'm actually not very, very happy with that name. I don't really think that brand is really significantly points to color. I just don't. I think that really should be a color, like so. But because I've actually have the schema, and I could actually pop this out over here and see exactly how this actually represents itself, I could actually make some really good decisions here. For instance, wouldn't a better name be color link active? Why would it be text? Did you want a different color for icons that linked? I don't think so. So we've actually, just because we sort of set this out right here, I think we have a far more meaningful name, and it follows the schema, and it's easier. It's much easier, but because we do sort of have this exercise of I will name this thing however I feel this day, without sort of a linguistic diagram schema. With the diagram, the schema, it actually makes a lot of sense. And every day is going to be different. So I suppose I do owe you a very, very brief of what all of those, what I call dynamics. So a domain, a category, a type, an item, what they actually mean. And you could, check out my Medium article, which goes into far more depth. But domain, very important. It's a 2 to 4 prefix letter that says who does this belong? What does this belong to in the design system? The category, is it a color? Is it a font? Is it a size, a spacing, a shadow? All those primitive values that really, and every single one is going, every single token is going to belong to one of these. A category will never not be filled in. And then we have a type. How is it used? Is it a background? Is it a border? Are there some other things? Okay, cool. And then the item itself, which is really the noun. It's like it goes on a button, it goes on a modal, it goes on a canvas, a paper. I mean, and those are all very interesting decisions to make in a global systemic sense. And then the variant, which is the semantic name. Well, let's say the button is like, there's a primary button, there's a secondary button, there's the just normal default button. Those would all be in the semantic. That's where you would put that name. And then a sub items would be something to say, okay, well, I've got everything else filled out, but maybe I wanted to find something inside that button. And then that's where you would put that. State, very interesting. And that's what I was saying, is that the language will change in context to what we're talking about, and its density, its sizes, and pseudostates. So densities could be a numeric, and you want to be very firm with that. It could be a size as a t-shirt size, or it could depending upon what we're talking about. If it has an item, you probably want to talk about an active and a hover and disabled, especially if it's an interactive item such as a button. And lastly, and I just popped this in here because some people do this. Sometimes we say, well, this is the color on dark, or this is the color on light, or in typography, we might say, that's 8 columns. This is the typography in 8 columns wide. That's another article. That's not particularly a thing that most people are doing. But I want to conclude right now is that we've only really just scratched the surface of how to name tokens. But all of these ideas and concepts are really the basis for getting forward. And a lot of that is really about, defining a schema and sticking with it. We know why naming things is hard is because effective communication depends upon a shared understanding of the syntactic meaning of words, which depends on culture, not just the language alone. And design tokens not only represent just the language that we use, but also the culture of the company that we're designing it for. Why naming tokens is important. We want to ensure that chairs are called chairs and horses are called horses. That allows us to scale without disagreement. And those are terrible. And finally, the CTI plus taxonomy of token names is a structure that we can use rather than simply whatever feels right to me right now. Be very, very demanding about your structure, and you will find that your design system can scale in ways that you can't see today, but tomorrow something's going to happen. Something new is going to be there. You want to be prepared to say, I know what that name is. So 259, that was a lot to cover. So I really appreciate everybody for joining. And I do wish we could have chatted. I hope it's not a technical issue on my end, because that would be sad. But that's how to name your tokens in a design system. All right, I guess I should run. There's plenty of other seminars. I'm going to grab some too, and hope to see you. All right. Bye, guys.